All right, we're going to get started this evening. We have a packed agenda, so I wanted to welcome everybody again and thank you for joining. I'd like to thank my fellow panelists from joining from various colleges and departments across Arizona State University. I would like to thank the UN Global Compact Network for hosting the conference and our colleagues and supporters from Arizona State University Global Futures Lab. So tonight we're going to discuss how an ethical circular economy can become a driver for change through realizing the SDGs. As you see, our panelists are going to provide an overview regarding their work as it relates to concepts like circularity, resiliency, inclusivity, and how we can actually measure our progress in striving towards a planet that's both habitable and equitable. Next slide, please. My name is Alicia Marseille, and I am Director of Innovation at Arizona State University. I'm excited to be here this evening. And over the past 3 years at ASU, I've been working on the Robin Melanie Walton Sustainable Solutions Services. We work on a wide range of projects with public and private sector stakeholders, and our primary goal and purpose, or reason to be, if you will, is to take the research and knowledge from inside the institution and apply it in various settings to actually make change, drive change, and create global impact. So our work at ASU draws a lot of parallels to one of my favorite economists, Mariana Mazzucato. There are a lot of economists that are making waves with new theories and ideologies. Mariana Mazzucato is one. There's others like Dambisa Moyo or Rebecca Henderson. And our work at ASU draws parallels to hers in that her work is related to innovation and mission-oriented innovation. Rather than focusing on particular sectors or industries, mission-oriented innovation focuses on problem-specific societal challenges. The focus is on the problems and the new types of collaborations that actually come from solving these problems and how to create diverse sets of solutions. It's an approach that put the man on the moon, that created the internet and solutions for things like ozone holes and acid rain. Next slide, please. We started to define this as the future of circular innovation. It's not just in the space of materiality and waste. Circular innovation can be used to describe various value chains that span from wastewater, energy, agriculture. It's about designing future communities and regions and collaborations, the future of discovery, where all material outputs, products, and resources are used with their highest value and improve livelihoods through inclusive economic development. I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Dr. Raj Butch from ASU.
Thank you, Alicia. I'm Raj Butch. We've been with ASU for about 8 years now, and I'm also with the Robin Melanie Walton Sustainability Solutions Service that Alicia described. Our signature work has been around circular economy for the last 6 or 7 years, and that's really what I'm going to talk about today, what we've learned from that and the kind of work we've done around inclusive or ethical circular economy. Go ahead, Tim. Next slide, please. So of the work we've done over the last several years, some of the critical factors in successfully making a circular economy, implementing a circular economy, is this holistic approach or the systemic approach that Alicia talked about a little bit ago. And these are the factors that we learned were critical to that success. So convening the right stakeholders and then developing shared purpose goals and measurement tools, which then builds trust. And it's critical to cultivate that trust because then you can get collaboration across all sectors of an economy, of a society, of a community, to drive the collective impact or the systems impact that everybody is mutually seeking. And then, as is often not the case, a lot of projects, pilot projects, work is done that is not mutually reinforcing, but it's important for systemic innovation, for systemic impact to coordinate those activities. And then, of course, this is an term effort generally, and continuous communication and reinforcing support are critical to that success. Next, Tim. So I'll just go through some examples. Our signature project in the Phoenix area, in Phoenix, Arizona, has been an economic development platform that we have developed around circular economy over the last 6 years. With funding from the city of Phoenix, we've completed more than 25 projects now, evaluating and testing innovative waste solutions. We've helped the city increase their diversion rate from landfill. So they're starting to realize some of those circular economy progress from that. Oh, we lost the slides. I'm just going to wait to see if they can join. All right, we'll do this without slides to keep it moving. We conducted economic impact studies for the Phoenix area to measure the economic impact that circular economy can have in terms of job creation, in terms of state GDP, in terms of tax revenue, and we started an we started a circular economy incubator and accelerator that incubated 19 companies, generated about $4 million in revenue, raised about $4 million worth of capital, and created 68 jobs. So that's the circular economy development platform we created in the region. Another project that specifically ties to sustainable development goals is we developed a framework to map solutions to the sustainable development goals. So we did this for Dell. They asked us to look at the goal number 4, the education goal, and measure online learning technologies, or ICTs, and try and connect them to, hey, Tim, you're back. Do you have slides to share? So, this Dell project, we're mapping ICT technologies to SDG 4. So basically what we did was we developed a theory of change around the indicators. So SDGs, as I'm sure a lot of you are familiar, 17 goals, 169 targets, and 231 indicators. So Tim, I'm on the mapping to sustainable development goal slide. If you could get to that so that everybody can see that. And the next one. Perfect. So mapping goal number 4 to ICT technologies. Previous slide, please, Tim. So basically, once you've selected the goal and identified the targets and the indicators that are already predefined, you can analyze those indicators and develop a theory of change and identify which indicators affect inputs, outputs, outcomes, or ultimately impacts. And once you know what those indicators are, you can develop that theory of change. You can map solutions to that theory of change, and then assess the impacts of those solutions and identify where new solutions or existing solutions need to be innovated to drive additional impact or other outcomes. So this is a framework we developed for SDG 4. Of course, it can be applied for any solutions and any of the SDGs. Can we go to the next slide? And then, of course, as a university, we do ethical circular economy training. We've got classes for students that we've been doing for the last 2 years. For the last 4 years, we've had a ethical circular economy workshop. Prior to COVID, of course, those were all face-to-face that we've done in many places around the world. In spring 2021, we hope to introduce a professional certificate in ethical circular economy, 3 classes that teach about what the linear economy is and how unsustainable that approach is, and then the ethical circular economy and tying it to the SDGs and how business models are being evolved around circular economy. And then a 3rd class in how to employ tools to make the transition from linear to circular. And with that, I don't know if Alicia is back. Alicia, are you on? If not, I think it's Rimjim. If you go to the next slide, Rimjim, you can take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Raj. I am Rimjim Agarwal. I am an associate professor at the School of Sustainability at ASU. I also lead a group called the Human Economies Group, which is part of the Global Futures Lab at ASU. Next, please. So I will talk about how to design an ethical circular economy and the role of the informal sector within it. Next, please. So our work takes the human economy as providing the foundation for an ethical circular economy. Keith Hart, who popularized this term human economy, argues that by calling the economy human, we put people first, making their thoughts, actions, and lives our main concern. And it's interesting to note here that 15 years back, when the UN Global Impact laid out the principles for a more inclusive and sustainable world, the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan called for a global compact of shared values and principles, which in his words will give a human face to the global market. So in economic terms, we've gone from an industrial economy where we hired hands to a knowledge economy where we hired heads to now a global human economy where we hire hearts. So the idea here is that when we talk about the ethical circular economy, we have to recognize not only the formal business practices, but also the various types of informal activities that are often marginalized, but constitute an integral part of the circular economy. So that's what I'm going to focus on. Next, please. So why is this important? So let us take the case of India, where I come from. And here on this slide, you can see a report that is cited, which pointed out that approximately $500 billion worth of economic value can be unlocked through circular economy business models in India. Now, that is a lot of money, $500 billion worth. And we argue that in order to effectively reach this $500 billion and be ethical, we need to recognize this ecosystem, which includes both the formal and informal enterprises, and recognize the role of innovation in both, not just the formal type of innovation that occurs. Next, please. So to understand this further, can you turn on the next slide? Yeah, so we can focus particularly on the recycling, yes, this slide. Recycling of discarded plastic, which according to that report represents a huge circular economy opportunity in India. Now, that report points out that India's per capita consumption of plastic currently is less than half the global average, but plastic demand in India is expected to rise at an annual rate of around 9%. And currently only around 60% is recycled, and it's largely done by informal workers. And there is a potential for something like 1.3 million incremental jobs. Now, all these numbers sound very attractive, but the question is, how is this going to happen? And when we talk about how, it is very important to pay attention to governance and design issues. So next slide, please. So if waste is so valuable, then it really leads to this next question about who has the right to the city waste. Now, that is a very important consideration when we talk about the ethics of the circular economy. Now, in most cities around the world, waste has customarily been owned by people who pick up the waste, and these are largely informal workers. But what has happened lately is that many municipal governments are taking up this role of waste collection and taking up the right to waste. This happened, for example, in the case of Delhi, which I have studied in my research, where waste collection and management services were contracted out to private contractors under the assumption that this would lead to a more efficient system and a clean city. This was also driven in a major way by the attraction of waste to energy projects under the opportunity for funding under the Clean Development Mechanism. Now, several research studies, such as the one shown here, which was done by the NGO called Chintan, showed that a major impact of this change was in terms of loss of livelihoods of the several hundreds of waste pickers in the city. Now, some of them were hired back as wage laborers by the private contractors, but only given minimum wage. And under those conditions, they had no incentives to apply their entrepreneurship skills, and they were largely disempowered. Also, in terms of environmental impacts, our work has shown that there was some short-term benefits, but later studies have shown that these capital investments, these heavy capital investments that were required for waste-to-energy plants could not be sustained. In fact, many of these plants have been running below capacity because not enough waste is being collected and brought into these plants. And again, this points to the role of the informal sector. Next slide, please. So now, finally, this is my final slide. As we think about the redesign of an ethical circular economy, here are some points that we need to think about. We need to first start with a systems view, where we first try to understand the linkages and the dynamics between the formal and the informal actors in the system, as is shown in this figure. And from there, we have to then identify leverage points where we can have maximum impact on the system. And our research shows that here, recognizing the role of informal door-to-door collection and segregation, which are critical to realizing the value of recycling and recovery, that needs to be recognized. Both door-to-door collection and segregation are highly labor-intensive processes and very relationship-intensive. And these are processes that technologies can't replace. You need humans for this, and particularly these workers in the informal sector. And this is where we can empower informal sectors by enabling business opportunities that link them better with the formal sector. Now, most of the discussion in the waste sector has been pitting formal against the informal. But of course, there are these synergies between formal and informal. And a good way to leverage these synergies is through thinking about creatively designing cooperatives, which can be an interesting organizational mechanism that can help increase the bargaining power of the informal workers and help them negotiate better with the formal sector to be a strong foundation for an ethical circular economy. So thank you very much for your attention. And I will now hand it over back to Alicia.
Good evening. Apologies, had a few technical delays. I had to hop back in to hop in. So would like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Kathleen Merrigan.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. So I am talking to you from my home in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm a professor at ASU, and I run a research center called the Sweetie Center for Sustainable Food Systems. I'm part of the ASU Global Futures Laboratory, helping to think through food systems. And I just want to say it's been fun watching the chat. I see people from all over the world logged on. So if you want to add your name to the list and say where you're from, that's a lot of fun. So my first slide, please. Thank you. All right, so we're talking about circular economy. I figure I better start with a circle. This is a graphic that's put out by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, our government, on food systems. And I show this to my students all the time because I want to explain to them a food systems lens is really figuring about all of the interconnectivity of all the different issues around food, how it's grown, how it's distributed, who gets that food. And it's very complex. And so we spent a lot of time looking at this food systems diagram, and I'm sure many of you have seen various iterations of this diagram, but as complex as this is, it's missing the whole issue of wasted food, the whole issue of waste that we just heard Rimjim discuss. How could that be, given that we know global wasted food is such a huge contributor to greenhouse gases and just a lost opportunity and so many of our different planetary challenges? How could that not be there? And it really goes to the point of the SDGs. So I feel sometimes as the food person in the room that I am just put into SDG 2, zero hunger. And I sit there and say, I can't achieve zero hunger with colleagues across the world unless we deal with gender equality. Most of the world's farmers are women, as you know, oftentimes not getting access to education, leadership opportunities, training that men have, land tenure. I can't achieve zero hunger without having sustainable consumption. And that goes right to poverty because a lot of people can't afford different sort of sustainability choices. So I just wanted the onset of this presentation to say we are dealing with very complex, interconnected issues, but we have to. There's that simplicity that's appealing in some levels, but unless we collaborate and really think about all the synergies and the gaps and do that kind of analysis, we'll never move forward in the way that we need to achieve the SDGs. Next slide, please. Well, COVID-19 has really laid bare the inadequacies of our food systems here in the United States, true globally too. You may have read about the problems in our meat processing sector, where we have very concentrated, very large-scale meat processing. But when workers became sick in those plants and they closed down, all of a sudden there was nowhere for farmers and ranchers to bring their animals for slaughter. A lot of those animals ended up being euthanized. And it, to me, is a really grand example of our over-reliance and our reverence for our worship of efficiency over resiliency in the food system. And so I'm hoping that together, academics and policymakers and practitioners in business will take a pause and realize that the COVID-19 stress test is just the precursor of what's to come with climate change, and Lord only knows what's next, and that we really should heed this moment and think through ways that we can build these circular economy ways of thinking to do better. Next slide, please. One of the efforts that I've been involved in with colleagues across 150 countries, very exciting, is an effort that was initiated by the United Nations Environment Program called True Cost Accounting. It's a variant of cost-benefit analysis, but what we're trying to do is come up with methodologies to put a value. As an American, I kind of prefer a price tag, but a value on externalities in food production, both positive and negative, so that we have a transparency and understanding about the true cost of food. That doesn't mean we want to raise the cost of food. There's so many people who are struggling to put food on the table these days. But if we understand really what the true cost is, then we can change policies to direct our food system in different ways. This is a slide just for fun. It shows the old parable of the blind man and the elephant. And you've, I'm sure, heard this before, where the blind men, depending upon what part of the elephant they touch, that's the conclusion of what they're feeling. And so if you're touching the tusks versus the tail versus the side flank, it's a really different animal. And it's just what we use in true cost accounting as a way to describe our effort to get that kind of whole vision of what true costs are. Next slide, please. Next slide, Tim. Thank you. And just as a thought experiment, I know the United Nations honored Impossible Foods last year with one of their awards, and I'm not saying that was right or wrong, but I am in my mind trying to apply true cost accounting thinking to the whole excitement over alternative protein. Now, clearly we need to reduce meat consumption in my country in particular for both health reasons and environmental reasons. And if there are a lot of alternatives, that helps people shift their dietary choices. But does it necessarily mean always an environmental or a social win? I think about all of the subsistence farmers globally, where livestock is very important to their livelihoods, where that livestock may be raised on land that's not arable for crops, that it makes sense. Those women may be, in fact, rearing the livestock. In this country, there's a lot of Midwest land that's put into soybean corn production. And there are a lot of costs to that, particularly around the use of pesticides. When we put those costs in, those plants that then go into a plant-based burger, so to speak, does it really cost out in the way that we want? So this true cost accounting, since we're really thinking about circular economy and full measurement and achieving the sustainable development goals, this true cost accounting, which I hope you'll hear more about, is aimed at trying to help us figure out new solutions to food systems that are being challenged now more than ever. So thank you very much, and back to our moderator.
Thank you, Kathleen. Up next, we have Dr. Mark Roseland.
Thank you, Alicia. And I am a professor of sustainable community development at Arizona State University. I've been at ASU for a couple of years. I'm from Canada, and I'm delighted to have such great colleagues at ASU. I'm really delighted to be following Kathleen because my talk really builds on what she was just speaking about. So Tim, if I could have the next slide, please. So I'm going to be talking about making the Sustainable Development Goals relevant for cities using the community capital tool. And I'm not going to be talking about cities so much, except in the sense that Kathleen was talking about community sustainability and bringing sustainability down to the community level. And Kathleen briefly mentioned a couple of capitals, and the point about community capital, as I'll discuss in a minute, it's a form of true cost analysis. It's a way of talking about multiple objectives. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Tim. So the framework that I use was developed in my book, Towards Sustainable Communities. This is the cover from the 4th edition from 2012. The 5th edition is on its way, hopefully in 2022. But I use a framework of multiple capitals. Some people use different numbers of capitals. Some people use 4 capitals. Some people use 3. Some people use 8. you could use all 17 of the SDGs as a form of capitals. It doesn't really matter to me. What's important is seeing them as a set. Now, there are some reasons for using 6 and for using these particular 6, which we can get into in the discussion. But for now, these are the 6 that I use. And in the next slide, I'll show you a little bit more about what I mean by them. Tim, please. Great. So natural capital, you've mostly all heard of. That's things like air and water and soil. Social capital is another one that is very well known. Communication and interaction and networking. But there's also physical capital, economic capital, human capital, and cultural capital. And the point about all of these things, like Kathleen said, and that analogy of the blind man and the elephant is so excellent for this. If you're trying to address one of the SDGs or one of these goals, one of these capitals without the others, it's just not going to work. And yet it's daunting. How do you deal with 17 goals or 169 targets and a gazillion indicators? So we have developed a way to do that. Tim, next slide, please. So we've taken this framework, which has community mobilization as its centerpiece, is how you balance and coordinate and catalyze this integration of these various capitals. But you can break each capital down into stocks and indicators and targets. And what we've done is we've created a 2-part tool. And one part is what we call a sustainability balance sheet. And that's for monitoring and assessment and measuring progress and reporting. And that's great. It uses a lot of data. Data is wonderful, but obviously data is not the answer to all of our problems. The world is full of data and we don't use it very well. So the other aspect of the tool, the other instrument is called the SCAN, and it's a community capital scan, and it's a decision support tool that helps people make decisions looking at all of these forms of capital at the same time. So Tim, next slide, please. So what that begins to look like is you can break down each of these capitals, as I said, by stocks and by indicators. But where it comes together is if you look at this middle diagram, and obviously I do whole courses on this, I don't have time to go in great detail, but in this middle diagram, I can tell you that we are looking at a situation that has high physical, cultural, and social capital, and low natural, economic, and human capital. And you're seeing all of that at once, and you're not seeing a billion spreadsheets, you're not seeing 1,000 indicators, you're seeing an integration of all of that data in a way that people can look at and say, okay, so if we're talking about a proposal, how can we adjust that proposal to keep what's good about it and strengthen the things that are not so good? Next slide, please. So what we're doing right now, this is just a quick sneak peek. We're doing a new version of this tool. It's version 4, and it's got a map base to it. So this is all going to be available in the next few months on the web, and you'll be able to look at each form of capital and look at a specific census tract. So we're working right now in Phoenix in a disadvantaged neighborhood called Maryvale, but the idea is we'll be able to do this in any other neighborhood in the US and ultimately anywhere else in the world. So lastly, last slide. If you are interested in this kind of work, we welcome you to join us. I have started something called the Community Capital Lab, where we conduct research and develop these kinds of tools and applications. It's based at ASU, but we work with researchers and practitioner partners across the country and around the world. And all you have to remember is Community Capital Lab at asu.edu. Send us a note, we'll get in touch with you. And if you're at all interested in contributing to this kind of work or benefiting from it, let us know, we'd be happy to talk with you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mark. Before we jump into the next guest who is an amazing guest. I realized our panelists were quite humble in their bios and introductions, and I wanted to do a 2-second overview of their bios to queue up some questions from all of you that are in the audience to utilize this opportunity to ask some pretty amazing experts any burning questions that you might have related to circularity. So starting with Raj Butch, he has a long career in renewable energy in the private sector and is now a sustainability scientist at ASU and has been the pillar and expert in the university in driving circular economy projects, specifically a premier one with the city of Phoenix that was a multi-year project. Rim Jim is an economist, trained economist who does a tremendous amount of work in looking at resiliency in social and ecological contexts and livelihoods and the multidisciplinary perspectives. She's done work related to the UN SDGs that was funded through the Gates Foundation. She's worked on several US national science funded projects in the innovations in food, energy, and the water networks. And she's also done consulting work for organizations like the World Bank and the United Nations. And Dr. Kathleen Merrigan was the Deputy Secretary and COO of the United States Department of Agriculture and has been a pioneer in a lot of the work that she discussed and has a vast experience in that space. And Dr. Mark Roseland is also a certified planner and so takes a very different approach in terms of his work and was actually the chief planner for the Metro Vancouver. And then our next speaker, Sarah El Batouti, is an architect by trade and is coming to us from Egypt and is an entrepreneur actually doing circular economy work that she's going to talk about with us today. So Sarah, if you're ready to join, thank you.
Apologies if I keep on losing my voice. So I wanted to start off by just saying that I am an architect that specializes in green buildings, most of which are certifiable buildings. And we were looking at how the buildings can be enhanced in a way that we can introduce more products into the buildings like furniture, etc. So we started a company. Next slide, please, Tim. We started a company. It's called Mubun, and Mubun basically means good wood. Just to give you an idea of where we are in Egypt with solid waste. So Egypt produces about 100 million tons of solid waste annually. 50% of that is collected through public and private companies. It's a very sophisticated system. Unfortunately, only 6% of that collected is recycled. Half of Egypt's waste is construction waste because there is demand for housing, there's demand for the growth of cities. There's also a very sophisticated furniture making industry that is revived and doing very well in municipalities. So part of the challenge was to think, what do we do with the waste from wood, or what do we do for the waste from marble, which are very sophisticated industries? And that's how we started off. We looked at, next slide, please. We looked at the reason why we have an issue is that we import wood in Egypt to produce all of this furniture, etc. And what could be done with the scrap wood and where does it go? And so we combined, the company started off with a group of people that wouldn't normally work together conventionally. So we have a master artisan carpenter, we have an architect, and we have an environmental researcher. And all of us were thinking, how do we do something with this problem? And how do we take technology and communications and work with it so that we can bring a new product made out of scrap waste onto the market? And where do we enter the market as a luxury good? or not. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to show you in detail one of our pieces, and I just wanted to show you how many small pieces are there to create this one piece of furniture. That's the challenge of scrap waste. It's because it is not the waste that is resold into the market. It's not these big pieces that you can do something with. It's very small. Next slide, please. And so if you look at how we worked this into the circular economy kind of ethos, so we import wood, it's bought into Egypt, and it goes straight into the sophisticated manufacturing sector and produces, products for interior designers, and that goes into homes, etc. The byproduct of this wood is gone into two sections. The first section is the one that is resold. The second one just becomes scrap waste, which doesn't have a channel for recycling or upcycling. It usually ends up in landfills or in the Nile or on the streets. And we thought, why don't we sift through that and see the product? The product comes in, it's segregated one way or the other. And then we produce from it these pieces. And the byproduct of the pieces becomes another piece. So I just wanted to show you that round table that we make. That usually becomes a small smooth edge table. And then we make the mirrors from the waste of that. Then you have a final product that goes into the market on our online e-commerce and straight back into the interiors again. So this is a kind of way of closing that loop where the imported wood is actually going straight back in. Next slide. So that's the process that we were talking about. The other one is the intricacy of who is working on this product. So I said that the initial team was a different group of people. And now what we're doing is that we have people segregating through the different types of wood. You have master artisans who are now training younger craftsmen. They have these wonderful skills that are becoming a bit isolated from the very fast manufacturing, mass production kind of industry. So we're bringing them back onto our teams, and they work to create these puzzles and small pieces and everything. And the innovation is that as designers, we are not imposing our design. We are trying to recreate a creative solution from the actual problem and what we can do with it as best as possible. So the process becomes very interesting. Next slide. And so you have from these tiny shards, we create the weave kind of technique, and then that becomes the headboard for the bed. And it's a great opportunity to introduce a product onto the market that now is considered from scrap-based. We're trying to raise the awareness that this is a luxury product, and the opportunity is that it is centered around the skills of the people that have that. So we're very excited about being among you. And next slide, please. And just reintroducing our products. We also work with palm and the waste from palm, and we've managed to have different products from these. And we are thinking of expanding into marble as well. So it's worked. The company has grown. We are now exporting. And it's a very interesting story, and it has an educational side and a job creation side. And I think us as designers, we have a role in the SDGs to innovate as much as possible, to tackle climate change, and to also create jobs. Thank you so much for back to you, Elisa.
Thank you, Sarah. If our panelists all want to join again for Q&A, so Those of you that are online with us, please feel free to keep your questions coming in the chat box. There have been some really great questions coming in. There was a really interesting question at the very beginning that was food for thought, no pun intended. But we talk a lot about negative examples, if you will, related to issues and global issues. And it'd be interesting to hear from some of our panelists of some stellar exemplar models or examples of circularity that you've worked on, or that you've researched, or that you've seen, to share.
So I'll just start on one really basic example, and it's probably very US centric. So apologies to all these unbelievable people from around the world that are on the panel, but in the United States, we have this basic problem where we have crop production over here and livestock production over there. And it doesn't make any sense for nutrient cycling. It's not good for the health of the planet, the health of the animals, or the health of the food that we're eating. So that's just one prominent example that I wrestle with on a daily basis.
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. Other panelists?
Yeah, coming from India, I can relate very well to one of the comments which was made about indigenous people and in indigenous cultures. Circular economy is just the way you live. It's a very natural way that you live every day. And I think our whole drive towards modernization and drive towards efficiency that Kathleen pointed to drove us towards linear economies, and now we are going to get back to circular economies. But being raised in India, and I think this is the same for indigenous cultures, this was very much part of our everyday life.
Yeah, thank you, Rim Jim.
Yeah, so I think to add to Rim Jim, the opportunity is to now take that waste that our linear economy is creating, especially in emerging economies, and turn that into jobs, turn that into production, not just movement of commodities, which is currently the case. Maybe
I'll
Sarah,
just add one more thing. Oops, sorry. I'll just add one more thing and then I'll step back. I'm so excited by what some of the more innovative chefs are doing. Yeah, I spend a lot of time thinking about animals. You get that because I repeat myself, maybe a sign of age, I don't know. But you know, when I think about what Dan Barber does up in New York State as one great example where he's making vegetables the center of the plate, where meat is more of a condiment, but he's figuring out how to use nose to tail that animal, which I think is so important. And when we have chefs who are culture leaders do that, that's really helpful.
Yeah, and I think an example that those of you that have on the panel that have interacted with me have heard me rant and rave about my interest with low-tech solutions in the space of circularity. If you're thinking about materials and how by nature low-tech solutions for processing or manufacturing or producing new products are inclusive by nature, they create more of a level playing field for others, if you will, to kind of be part of the production processes. And so I think thinking about technology, not just always big wins in terms of high tech, but how low technology solutions actually provide perhaps even a greater opportunity in some spaces. Okay, so another question in thinking about some of the different things that have come up. Rim Jim, wanted to see if you could provide some examples of waste cooperatives that have been able to ethically engage informal waste pickers.
Yeah, so one of them comes from the study that I had cited by this NGO called Chintan in Delhi that has organized the informal waste collectors into a cooperative, and being part of our cooperative has enhanced their bargaining power. They have been linked to formal workers, to formal sector. And very importantly, you might know that about a quarter of the waste pickers in the emerging world are children. And so there is a tremendous child labor problem also. And so through those cooperatives, they've been able to ensure higher earnings for the parents so that they don't need to have children work at the wayside, and children are being educated. And another quick example is of this group Seva, also from India, that does that has been for long involved in various kinds of cooperatives. They've got the sweepers and the cleaners together in a cooperative. And I think dignity of labor is one important thing that we need to restore in the circular economy if we want to talk about ethics. And that is what I think these cooperators have been able to do successfully, is to raise the image and increase the dignity of labor of these often marginalized people.
Yeah, I'd like to add to Rimjin's comment there. Another cooperative that's also from India is Amul. That's AMUL. It's a dairy cooperative of millions of farmers, but the reason it's so successful is they own the entire value chain of the dairy product all the way into the end markets. And if that kind of a model can be replicated for the waste system and the waste collectors, then it'll be that much more successful and a greater chance of livelihood improvement.
Yep, thank you. Waste pickers is another topic that I tend to rant and dive into rabbit holes, specific interest of mine. But a question from somebody that's in the audience, Katura asked a great question. Where does the panel see potential funding coming in to implement different ideas in the developing world? And yeah, I think some ideas from some of you, and I know this is kind of a loaded question, if you will, but it's definitely food for thought in terms of what the different funding could look like to do some of this work.
I can.
Yeah, well, we might be on a. There, you.
Yeah.
And it's vocational training is an excellent opportunity for funding. There are many skills in the developing world, and I'm talking specifically, in North Africa, that need to have the investment in knowing how it can be integrated with the problems that we have, like solid waste, for instance, and also how indigenous knowledge, local crafts and skills, and make them sort of integrated with technology, how to they market it and they produce locally. So there should be funding in the opportunities. I think it's incredibly important to from this in order to encourage people to be creative. And what we see is usually that it's higher.
Oh, we can't hear her. Sorry, Sarah, you kind of cut out. But no, but absolutely. And I think absolutely, how do we localize these efforts? How do we bring in also local resources, not always from the international development space, but is there an opportunity to bring in public-private resources in different contexts and localize it? We use a phrase a lot at ASU, templatized, customized, where, what are some frameworks that can be replicated and customized in different areas? And then bringing in the native lens also, which is imperative, versus a blanketed approach. Yeah, great point. Not sure if anyone else wanted to weigh in on that.
To say that point I made on the worshiping of efficiency also comes in when countries do their development aid. They want to scale up and do efficient food operations. And then you get all kinds of displaced subsistence farmers, and they move to cities where there's no jobs and they're living in slums. So that's again, we got to connect the dots and deal with these complications. And so there's so much work to be done. I don't even know where to begin on that one.
Social circular systems.
Well, and some of it goes to a lot of Mark's work, and Kathleen, you hinted on this, and it's something we talk at length about. Is some people think, all right, I'm just going to focus on these 3 SDGs, and I'm doing my part. And Mark, if you want to speak to, I've heard you say several times, you know, if it takes all 17 to create healthy communities and societies, what are the trade-offs of making those decisions?
Well, thanks, Alicia. And it's not just trade-offs. It's synergies, right? If we do it, we do it thoughtlessly, we trade off. And as soon as you're trading off, we give up and we let the sort of conventional economic thinking take over, and we can never do anything. If we recognize the connections, then by investing in one of the goals, but doing it in a way where we're consciously trying to build co-benefits, we can support all of the other goals at the same time. So that's what I call the sweet spot, sort of avoiding the false trade-offs and looking for the sweet spot where if you do one thing, you get multiple co-benefits. So all of the research we're doing at the Community Capital Lab is about how do you identify those sweet spots. So if you're interested, come join us.
I only have a few minutes left, I think, before we get cut off. I wanted to thank all of our panelists. This was tremendous. It almost seemed too short. We could use another hour or 2. It's hard to address such massive problems, but thank you everybody for your time. I think 3 things that I really heard come across through the panel is a lot of words that start with heavy meaning, that start with collaboration, co-benefits, cooperatives, and I would say also co-sharing risks, right? So co-sharing investment, co-sharing risks, which enable everybody to kind of collaboratively reap the benefits. So
Co-creating.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.